As many of you know, my wife, Brianne, is also a United Church minister. Sometimes people ask us if we ever share sermons, and the answer has always been no. We often talk about what we are going to say on Sunday mornings, but we have different styles, and each enjoy the art of crafting a message specific to the needs of our different communities. But Brianne preached a Good Friday sermon a number of years ago and told a story within it that I have never forgotten. It is the story of how she first broached the subject of death with our son Isaiah. Indeed, the story has become part of our family story, and on this Good Friday, I would like to share it with you. These next words are Brianne's words. A number of years ago, when Isaiah was 3 and Simon was 1, it was the first really nice day of spring, so I piled them into our double stroller and we set out for a long walk towards Lake Ontario. A few blocks from our house, we started to come upon something large, fuzzy, and very, very still. As we got closer, I realized it was a raccoon, and it was very dead. I am always sad when I see dead animals on the side of the road, and had I been walking by myself, I probably would have called the city to have them come and remove it. But I wasn't alone, and so my first instinct was to turn around or to cross the street so Isaiah and Simon wouldn't have to encounter the carnage ahead. But before I could do that, I heard Isaiah's sweet little voice speak up. "Look, Mama, that raccoon is sleeping on the sidewalk. Shh, don't wake her up." Now, it was fairly obvious that this raccoon had met a violent end, and I could have left it. I could have just said, "Yeah, funny that," and just went on with our day. But I thought about our old cat, who probably only had a few years left with us. And I thought about my father, who had just had his prostate removed, and we were still waiting to hear if the cancer had spread or not. And I thought, perhaps, that having a conversation about a dead raccoon would be the gentlest entry into the topic of death I could hope to have. Better a dead raccoon than a beloved family pet or grandparent. And so I took a deep breath and said, "Isaiah, honey, that raccoon is not sleeping. That raccoon is dead." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, pondering this, and then he spoke. "Mama, kiss him better." "Pardon me?" "Just kiss him better, Mama, like you do for me." And staring at that bleeding, broken body, my heart cracked open. Because, of course, no matter how powerful and how healing mama kisses are, they cannot fix a dead raccoon. "Honey, that raccoon is dead," I said. And then we went over what happens when animals and people die. Their hearts stop beating, their lungs stop breathing, and their body stops moving. Isaiah was concerned. Together we felt his heart, his lungs, and his body. He did a little dance, and we assured ourselves that he was indeed alive. But he still didn't understand why I wouldn't kiss the raccoon, why I wouldn't at least try. I finally had to tell him that Mama's kisses can't fix everything. They can't fix death. And that, I think, was the hardest part for him and for me. Being confronted with the reality that there are just some things that can't be fixed. That is where the heartbreak lives. That is where the heartbreak lives. When you look at all the pain and suffering in the world, don't you just wish you could take it all away? Sickness, loneliness, poverty, war. Don't you just wish you could kiss it all better? I do. I wish I had that kind of power. But I don't, and neither do you. And this, as Brianne said, is where the heartbreak lives. Bad things happen. Death happens. Through advances in medicine and compassionate care, we may be able to delay death, but ultimately we are powerless to prevent it for ourselves and for the people we love. On that fateful Friday so long ago, Jesus' mother Mary's love could not save him from the cross, and her kisses could not heal his broken body. Death came even for the Son of God. This day reminds us that death is not something we get to avoid by averting our eyes or crossing the street. It is the one constant, the common denominator. Death binds us all together. But let's admit it, we all try to ignore it. We would rather talk about anything else. If we could, I bet we would have it stricken right out of our vocabulary. Especially in recent years, have you noticed that in the public dialogue, we rarely say that someone has died anymore? We are much more likely to say that someone has passed away or passed on. Likewise, we rarely have funerals anymore because they are seen to be too focused on death. We are more likely to have a memorial service or a celebration of life if we have anything at all. COVID tore a hole in our ritual life that has not been mended. In my work, I have been surprised how many people have not left instructions for their final wishes, perhaps not wanting to burden people with grief, or not wanting to make unchurched family members uncomfortable with our spiritual traditions founded on the life and death of Jesus Christ. But even if this avoidance comes from a good place, it is no gift to our loved ones. If we try to ignore grief, it does not go away. It just manifests in other often unhealthy ways. If we lose the traditions and rituals that we have been doing to mark death in some form or another since the beginning of us, we lose a fundamental aspect of who we are as human beings. If we lose the ability to process our reality when bad things happen, we become more prone to skip over the surface of things. We become numb to life and remove ourselves from the rich tapestry of joy and pain, longing and fulfillment offered through our mortality. Simply put, we can't fully live unless we understand that we will die. Our son Isaiah spent months, literally months, trying to process his experience with the dead raccoon. One day we went to the library and he asked if he could take out a book about raccoons. We couldn't find one, so we asked the librarian for help. When she found a book, Isaiah looked at it and asked, "Is this a book about alive raccoons?" And when the librarian looked puzzled, he explained, "Because I really need a book about dead raccoons." So deep and so honest was this 3-year-old's desire to process his encounter with death. And not being able to find what he needed in the library, with Brianne's help, he wrote his own book. He wrote his own book that still has pride of place in our bookshelf. It starts out, "Once upon a time, there was a dead raccoon. She didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It must have really hurt. And Mama couldn't kiss it better. But Isaiah was alive, and that made him happy." The Gospel according to Isaiah. Good Friday is not easy. It is not meant to be. It is the day when death is unavoidable. It is when Jesus encounters the very worst of humanity, our cruelty, our brutality, our mob mentality, but he finds the strength to move through this day nonetheless. The Gospels tell us that he spent months, years, perhaps his whole life processing his own death so that he could move through this day with faith. He knew, as we know, that Good Friday is not the end of the story. It is the day we must move through in order to authentically, truthfully, and joyfully experience Easter Sunday. But before we get there, to that morning of daffodils and hallelujahs and the final victory of love, we have this day to sit with grief, to try to process our mortality, to consider what is truly important to us and what service God might be calling us into with the time we have left here on this side of the veil. Good Friday is the day when death is unavoidable. And so maybe, just maybe, this is the day to have the conversations that perhaps you have been putting off. The conversations that may feel uncomfortable, but are actually a gift to those people that you love. Maybe this is the day to talk to your kids about death, or to share your final wishes with your family or your church. And maybe, just maybe, this is the day to talk to the people you love about your faith and how ritual and tradition and the stories we tell in places like this can bring strength to the inevitable times of grief and loss and death that we all encounter. Jesus knew, as we know, that Good Friday is not the end of the story. God's promises are true, and love is the final fulfillment. But until then, we have this time. We have this gift of encountering death so that we may truly live.